Good morning, folks. Welcome to the last day of Climate Change Week. I'm going to get started just in a minute. Welcome, everybody who's just joining. I'm going to get started shortly. All right. So hello, bonjour. Welcome to the 10th annual Tantramar Climate Change Week. My name is Lauren Clark and I'm a project coordinator with EOS Eco Energy. EOS is now an environmental charity and we've been around for more than 17 years. And we work on projects to do with renewable energy, energy conservation, efficiency, sustainable community planning, climate change adaptation, watershed health. And EOS would like to respectfully acknowledge that our work is done on the unceded traditional lands and waters of the Mi'kmaq. So I'd like to introduce Kirsti Mrazek, who's going to tell us about sharks, whales, and sea urchins.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. All right. Oh, wait, I gotta share my screen. All right, so yes, my name is Kirsti Mrazek and I'm the climate change coordinator for the town of Sackville, but today I'm going to be talking about how the oceans are being impacted by climate change. Given my background is in marine biology, I thought it's an important topic to cover. And I've chosen sharks, whales, and sea urchins as they're the species that I have the most experience with and they're my favorites. So I've chosen some key studies to kind of highlight the impacts, but overall, I'm just going to be giving a high-level overview of the impacts the oceans are facing and using these three groups of organisms just to illustrate specifically some of the impacts they are facing. And this video is a video I took of a blue shark off of Nova Scotia. All right, so quickly an outline. Like I said, a quick overview of impacts the oceans are seeing and going into sharks, whales, and sea urchins, which my master's degree was on sea urchins. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that and then going into what some things are being done to help and what we are doing about it. So a background in me, just so you have some context, I went to Dalhousie and I did my Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology and Ocean Science. And then I did my Master's in Marine Biology at James Cook University in Australia. So starting off really high level, 2021 to 2030 has been declared the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development by the United Nations. And the vision for this decade is really just doing the science that we need, creating policies for the ocean that we want. And the mission is to create transformative ocean science solutions for sustainable development by connecting people and our oceans. And there are 18 UN Sustainable Development Goals, but number 14 specifically is related to life below water. And the goal here is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. So this graphic is a lot, but I thought it illustrated really well all of the different impacts the oceans are facing. And it's actually an interactive website. I have the link, I can share it at the end if anyone is interested, but it's really just encompassing every single thing that the ocean's facing and how everything is so interconnected. You can click on all of these things and it'll bring you to that page and has information, but it really shows just how interconnected and complex everything relating to the ocean is. But I thought that this just really highlighted that point here. So this is just a quick graphic, really basic, just showing some of the main effects on oceans from climate change, and specifically ones that I will be addressing. So of course, increasing emissions has increased our ocean temperature, which is decreasing oxygen content, but also increasing temperatures is having effects on where species are distributed. So it's shifting their migration patterns and timing, all related to the temperature. We also have ocean acidification. So increased carbon dioxide absorbing into the ocean is having an effect on calcifying organisms. So coral, sea urchins, lobsters, anything that's creating shells or skeletons is being impacted by this. And it also, ocean acidification is changing the chemistry of the ocean. So that's affecting how organisms communicate to each other through signaling, through chemical signaling. We also have the weakening of ocean currents, or just changing of ocean currents in general, whether that's through temperature shifts on land, that would be changing weather patterns, but it's also altering nutrient distribution, which affects ultimately everything. And then, of course, on land, we have sea level rise, which is leading to coastal flooding for communities like Sackville. So quickly, I wanted to just describe how the ocean's biological pump works. This is a really simple graph here, but the ocean absorbs carbon in two ways. One is through the direct air to sea exchange, just by processes that are happening at the surface, and also through photosynthesis by phytoplankton. So these are our primary producers that take in carbon dioxide and create oxygen, and they are part of a much larger food web and biological pump. When they sink down to the deep, they bring the carbon with them, or if they become part of the food chain by being eaten by other organisms, it's really a full circle entity there, but that's really where the biological pump starts and how carbon is absorbed. And the ocean has been absorbing around 30 to 40% of human emissions. There's different stats, but the general consensus is around 30 to 40% of all of our emissions, but the volume of CO2 that it is uptaking is increasing. So carbonate is essential to certain organisms, like I mentioned. All shell-building organisms, such as sea urchins, coral, lobster, and even some plankton, use carbonate ions to build their shells, mostly calcium carbonate. And when they die and sink down, they transport that carbon down into the deep ocean that becomes part of the sediments and other ocean currents. So as the ocean is acidifying, this affects the pH. Clearly, it decreases the pH, and this affects how the organism's ability to create their shells, whether it actually increases their availability or it affects and dissolves their shells, really. So there's differing levels here, but it affects all shell-building organisms. All right, so starting off with sharks. How are they being impacted? So overall, sharks see many different impacts, whether that's from overfishing, illegal fishing, bycatch from fisheries, habitat degradation, pollution, mislabeling of shark meat, as well as climate change threaten all shark species. And climate change may not be the most, dire threat to sharks, but it still is one that's really, really important. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So some of the responses that sharks are seeing to climate change are shifts in species distribution, both vertically in the water column and latitudinally. So increasing temperatures is going to push species further to the poles so that they can keep within their thermal ranges, as well as physiological changes, behavioral changes, and overall just population declines if they're not able to either move or adapt to these warming temperatures. So I've chosen two studies to highlight to illustrate these impacts. The first one is on Epaulette sharks. and it's called Future Thermal Regimes for Epaulette Sharks, Growth and Metabolic Performance Cease to be Optimal. So epaulette sharks are endemic to the Great Barrier Reef. They are ectotherms, so that means that they rely on the environmental heat for all their physiological and metabolic processes. And tropical species tend to operate at very, very small thermal ranges, especially when they're in the embryonic stage. So it's really important that their environment and temperature is stable for these processes. So this study reared 27 epaulette embryos in 3 different temperatures that simulated predicted climate change conditions in the future. So the present day temperature was 27 degrees, the mid-century was 29, and the end of century is 31 degrees Celsius. And they tracked embryonic growth, the development, the neonate survivorship, so once they were hatched, and also their metabolic rates to see how the temperature affected them. So for the results, the embryonic growth rates and the yolk consumption were actually faster in the higher temperatures when compared to 27 degrees, which makes sense. Your metabolism usually increases at higher temperatures. And the incubation time, so the time that they were in these egg casings, actually decreased as the temperature went up. So at 27 degrees, present day normal conditions, they usually incubate for 125 days. But at 31 degrees, they saw that they actually hatched after around 101 days. So a huge decrease in incubation and development time. Once they were born, the neonate body mass was less at higher temperatures, but this didn't actually affect the overall body condition or body length. And as well, for metabolic processes, they noted that the oxygen uptake rates were lower at 31 degrees, so they weren't able to get as much oxygen as they would need. So overall, these findings indicate that clearly at higher temperatures, the embryos cannot operate optimally. So we may be seeing shifts in the distribution of these epaulette sharks, or just changes in timing of their breeding season to accommodate these different temperatures, because like I said, they are endemic to this tropical Great Barrier Reef, and they can't just, they can't move that much. So it will likely see changes in timing for their breeding and hatching seasons. All right, now moving on to this side of the world with tiger sharks. So this study was actually published a few weeks ago, and it's called Ocean Warming Alters the Distributional Range, Migratory Timing, and Spatial Protections of an Apex Predator, the tiger shark. So this study used a combined analysis of 9 years of satellite tracking data, remotely sensed environmental information, habitat modeling, and 40 years of fisheries capture data to determine potential shifts in tiger shark distribution. So the 3 main research questions, there was 5, but I'm only going to discuss these 3, was, does the distributional range extend farther poleward in response to warming? Does the seasonal migration of tiger sharks into their northerly range occur earlier? And have these climate-driven shifts in tiger shark space use altered their overlap with management zones that afford them protection from fisheries or bycatch? So the study found that the sharks did migrate earlier and farther north in years when the sea surface temperature was higher. There was some anomalies. So they found that for every 1 degree Celsius increase in sea surface temperature anomalies, the sharks extended their movements northward by 4 degrees of latitude and actually arrived in their northern waters 14 days earlier. They moved poleward and outside of their protected areas during these higher sea surface temperature anomalies, which means that they moved into areas where perhaps commercial longline fishing is not prohibited, and they face new impacts, which is really something that we'll be seeing with all migratory species. Is as they move poleward, they're moving out of protected areas, out of areas that they're usually not there. So they're facing new impacts with fisheries interactions and competition with other species as well. So this figure is just showing, it's the sea surface temperature anomaly on the x-axis, and then the probability of protection as the sea surface temperature goes higher. So you can see that in both the cold and warm seasons, as the sea surface temperature anomalies are greater, their probability of protection or being in an area that is protected decreases. All right, moving on to whales. So what impacts are whales facing? So in addition to climate change, whales are threatened with anthropogenic noise, which is human-caused noise, whether that be from vessels, offshore activities, seismic activities, vessel strikes, fisheries interactions, and pollutions, pollution. I know many people will be familiar with the vessel strikes and fisheries interactions here, as that's close to home with the North Atlantic right whales. And so what responses are we seeing from whales in response to climate change? Again, we're seeing range shifts, whether that be for temperature or to follow their prey. They're seeing competition with new and other species for food. Like for the sharks, moving into new areas means new human and fisheries interactions, changes in migration routes and timing, and even the potential for hybridization of species or subspecies, which has been seen with blue whales. So specifically, I thought I would talk about the North Atlantic right whales. This study is from 2019, and it's called Variation in North Atlantic Right Whales Occurrence in the Bay of Fundy over 3 decades. So it wanted to really characterize the seasonal, annual, and spatial variability in their summertime feeding. So when they come up to Atlantic Canada in the summer, how has that been varying over the years? So North Atlantic right whales have shown a preference for the Grand Manan Basin during the summer. That is where their main food source, which are copepods, which are small plankton, are the main source of their food, and that's where they live. But they have been shifting northward in the past decades. So copepods rely actually on deep water temperatures for their life cycle. They rely on cold water. But the Gulf of Maine, which is the copepod's southernmost region, has been warming. So they've been shifting or decreasing in density because of this. So this study found that there has been a decline in North Atlantic right whale occurrence in the Bay of Fundy starting around 2010, which is obvious. We're seeing these shifts already. The detections, though, of North Atlantic right whales have increased in other areas like Cape Cod Bay, Mid-Atlantic Bight, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is kind of what we're seeing now is in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, these whales are having these new fisheries and human interactions where they're moving out of their other critical habitat that we know about. So monthly net tows in the Bay of Fundy, net tows for plankton, have shown seasonal shifts in timing and abundance of copepods. So it makes sense that the whales are following these copepods and the timing of them, as that is their main food source. And copepod populations also saw negative anomalies in many years. So this means that they've decreased in density and availability for the whales as temperatures warm. And so this shows that it is likely that the whales follow these copepod populations, and perhaps the decline in reproduction rates may indicate a lack of adequate food in these certain locations, whether that be through copepod like nutrient availability, or there just isn't enough. But there is likely a lag in a few years for this, because obviously to acquire enough reserves to mate and carry a calf to term is a multi-year process. So I just wanted to highlight this as kind of what we're seeing with right whales, and I'm sure that all of us here recognize it and see it on the news. All right, so now moving on to sea urchins. Like I said, during my master's, this was a project that I helped work on, and it's part of a much larger project that's actually still ongoing. But at the Australian Institute of Marine Science, they're trying to do evolution and adaptation experiments to see if sea urchins who are raised in higher temperatures that simulate the temperatures for mid to end century, does that give them an advantage if their parents and multiple generations have been raised in those temperatures? And do we see any evolution or adaptation? So there's been massive heat waves on the Great Barrier Reef in the past few years that have led to multiple mass coral bleaching events, which ultimately affects the entire coral reef ecosystem. I mentioned at the beginning that increased CO2 has reduced the pH of seawater by 0.1 units so far, which lowers the carbonate saturation rates and affects marine organisms like sea urchins who use carbonate to create their shells. The temperatures for the Great Barrier Reef are predicted to rise between 2 to 4 degrees and the pH to be lowered by another 0.3 to 0.4 units. And ocean acidification has been linked to abnormal development and growth of sea urchins at their larval stages, but as well in their later years. So overall, the main research question was, will sea urchins, which specifically the tropical Echinometra species, will they be able to adapt to the changing ocean conditions over multiple generations? So diving in a bit more, some background information on these Echinometra. They are found throughout the Great Barrier Reef and the Indo-Pacific on shallow reef flats. They are benthic herbivores. They mainly eat detritus and algae off of the coral. And they play really, really important ecological role in the grazing of algae, and they are rock boring urchins. So they are really responsible for a lot of these coral reef processes. And if anyone listening here has taken any type of ecology course, I'm sure you would have heard about the cascade effects of sea urchins and sea otters and kelp. So that's just another indication of how ecologically important sea urchins are to many different kind of ecosystems. But on the Great Barrier Reef, these urchins are predated on by multiple coral reef fish such as triggerfish, wrasse, and emperors. So this is an overview of the experiment. This middle photo here is the room that the experiment took place in. So those are all the tanks that we used. And this is called the sea simulator. So it's a really complex aquarium system where water from the ocean is actually pumped into all these tanks, and it simulates exactly the temperature out on the reef, the pH, everything, so that we can do the best in a laboratory setting to have similar ocean conditions. And that's me on the right there, just taking a pH and temperature sample of the different treatment tanks. But so this figure highlights an overview of what the study what the design of the study is. So like I mentioned, we had the present day temperature of 27 approximately degrees. And then another treatment we had was mid-century, so 2050 degrees, or 2050 time frame, about 29 degrees. And then we had the treatment of 2100 end of century time frame, which is about 31 degrees. So really what happened was they collected urchins off the reef, and that was the parent first generation. And either they were put in treatments of just continual present day conditions, or they were acclimated to 2050 temperature and CO2 conditions. And then after, I think it was 17, 18 months, once we had them in those tanks, we actually, well, they spawned them, which they reproduced, and they created this second generation and put them into different treatment tanks. So some went into the same present day conditions, and then, or they went into 2050 conditions. So the ambient 2050 means their parent generation was in the ambient conditions and they were in the 2050 conditions. Or the third, they went into 2100 scenario. And same goes for the 2050. They either stayed in this or they went into the next scenario up. So, and they're at multiple generations now. My part was just a very small aspect to this overall study. But really, like I said, the main goal is to see how over multiple generations, these sea urchins are able to adapt and evolve to warming temperatures. And if having their parent generation in these warmer conditions, does that help them fare better? And this photo up here on the top left is where we kept the fertilized eggs for a few hours. So this graph is just illustrating what the temperature and CO2 conditions are for each treatment. So the blue line, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the blue line is the present day. So in the summer, they're around 28 degrees. And then in the winter, the water temperature goes down to around 23. Mid-century predictions is around peak 29 degrees in the summer and 25 degrees in the winter. And then for the end of century, we're seeing all the way to around 30, 31 degrees in the summer and 25, 26 degrees in the winter. But ironically, actually this past summer, well, it's summer in Australia right now, but just this past few months, the temperatures are actually reaching 31, 32 degrees on the reef. So they're actually already at predicted conditions. Of course, this is just an anomaly. It hasn't stayed like that, but it is kind of interesting to note that we're already seeing some of these temperatures on certain days. So these are the results from the first part of the study that was published. So like I said, the hypothesis was for parental acclimation. Would it help offspring to be better acclimatized to future ocean conditions? So for survival, the group that was held in ambient conditions, so the ones that had parent in present conditions and their generation was also in present conditions, they had a higher survivorship overall throughout the entire experiment. For size, the present day treatments were on average 21% larger than the average of the other groups. There was actually a disease outbreak during the experiment, which was not planned at all, but it did create a mass mortality event affecting all of the treatments. However, the present day treatment individuals actually fared better than the 2050 and 2100 treatments. Only 5 individuals survived from the 2050 treatment. So we kind of saw that acting as a selective sweeper, you know, a natural adaptation, survival of the fittest. Those who survived that disease obviously were able to withstand that and will pass on their genes to the other generations. So, and this disease outbreak actually happened in this study, and then it happened the following year as well. So we're not really sure why there was a disease outbreak, but it did happen in all of the treatments. So it wasn't selective to certain ones. And then for spawning, so all of the treatments made it to maturity or successfully were able to spawn, which is good, but there were lower numbers for the 2050 and 2100 treatments. So not every individual was actually able to spawn when we tried to induce that. So in conclusion from this particular study, it seemed that there was a negative carryover effect from the parental generation to offspring. Having your parent brought up in the 2050 or 2100 conditions did not seem, just through 2 generations, to have helped the second generation fare better. And this figure is just to illustrate, after this disease outbreak, the proportion of healthy juveniles following the disease event. So the far left is the two generations that were in present day conditions. So you can see that their proportion of healthy juveniles was much, much higher than all of the other treatments there following the disease. All right, so part of my, part of my project was to actually look at the density of the spines and the tests, which the tests are the skeletons. So as I mentioned, with ocean acidification, it's affecting how these organisms form their shells, but it also is affecting the density of them because the acidic water actually dissolves them. So what I did was after their generation had spawned, we kept them in bottles, and what I did was I bleached them to get off of all the organic matter off of them, and then dried them in an oven so that they looked like this photo on the right. And so what I did was I measured the spines and the tests on their own, and that's me in the left photo doing that. So that machine is a buoyant weight machine. So on the top, I would first measure the dry weight of the spine and the tests. And then in the middle part, there is the buoyant weight part. So there's a scale hanging in water. And so I would use the dry and the buoyant weights to determine the density of the spines and the tests to see how they've compared to all the different treatments. And this data is not published yet. It's still ongoing because they're still doing more generations. But from the data that I saw and collected, you could tell that the density of the urchins that were grown or grew up in the higher treatments, higher temperature and higher PCO2 conditions, did have less dense spines and tests than the ones in present day conditions. So obviously it is affecting the density of their shells. So today, where the experiment is at, they're still going on. Like I said, they're at 6 years now for this evolution and adaptation experiment. They just completed in January a 3rd generation of the 2100 individuals. So they have lots of data to compare and see how they're faring. But from my supervisor, he said that still the larvae that are from 2100 temperature and pH conditions are still really not performing as well as we would hope. And there has not been any real signs of adaptation even after all these generations. And I just wanted to add in these photos because I also helped out with some project on Crown of Thorns sea stars. That's them as an adult in the bottom right. They are massive. They can grow to be around 1 meter, and they eat coral. So they're not an invasive species, but when there are outbreaks of these sea stars, they can decimate parts of the reef. So my supervisor as well was doing work on them, on their larval ecology and feeding them different types of phytoplankton. But I just wanted to add in these photos because I think they're really cute as babies. On the left, that's them a few weeks old. They look like little gummy bears. And then in the middle, that's them after a month or two, I think, when they settled onto little coral rubble. And then the photo in the top right is them after about a year old, and the littler ones were raised on different food than the bigger ones. But just wanted to add those photos in because they're pretty cool. All right, so there's my kind of high overview of specific species and how they're being impacted. Now I wanted to talk about kind of what we're doing about it, and I thought I would just talk about specifically Canada. Right now, Canada has a goal set to have 25% of our land and oceans protected by 2025 and 30% by 2030. We currently have around 14% of our oceans that are designated as marine protected areas. And so with the goal, that will hopefully be increasing. I also noticed Canada's Blue Economy Strategy that was open for public consultation last year. So hopefully that will be coming out soon. And then to discuss a few of the ocean related items that came out of COP26 in the fall. Canada endorsed a statement to progress on ocean-based climate action to meet our Paris Agreement and UN Sustainable Development Goals. We pledged $9 million in additional support to Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance for small island developing states. In addition, $6 million for Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And we also made commitments to establishing green marine shipping corridors, so essentially zero emission shipping routes. And this slide is just a lot of organizations in Canada that are working on science to create these policies for the protection of the oceans. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. I could talk here all day about probably one of these. So just a really small snapshot in what's going on at the nonprofit UN level. But I think that is all. This picture was actually on my supervisor's door. I just thought it was funny, so I popped that in there. But that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. I hope I was able to give a good overview of kind of the basic impacts the oceans are seeing. And if you have any questions, hopefully I'll be able to answer them. I'm not an expert in any of these topics really, but I'd be very happy to discuss if you have any questions. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirsti. I have so many questions that I'm sure lots of other people do as well. If you guys want to use the like hand up function, like raise your hand function, but also I will maybe allow folks to unmute themselves. I think I've just done that there. I was mixed up yesterday, but I figured it out now. So maybe while we're waiting for other people, I'm just gonna look at my notes. I was wondering, you were talking about how I think you were talking about sharks and how they're arriving like sooner to northern water and how they've moved outside of their like protected areas. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you know if there are any efforts to like change the boundaries of protected areas to like take into account the fact that they're moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely there are, and it's something that, you know, is a specific area of research, is marine protected areas and, you know, collecting data on these specific species. But it's difficult because, you know, creating a moving protected area is difficult for many reasons, you know, on the management level, especially when these sharks are going across boundaries between Canada and the US. Managing them the same way is really tricky, but absolutely that's what a lot of researchers focus on right now, is trying to track these species, but also simulations and models of how these temperatures are going to affect them so that we can at least predict and try and estimate where they will go, so that when we do create marine protected areas, it hopefully encompasses where they will be going. But it is something that's really, really tricky and continually moving. So it's hard, but it's really important because, like I said, you know, moving to new areas, they face new threats that they wouldn't have faced before, and it's hard to manage and protect them. But yes, they're currently working on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess maybe they're not sure exactly where they're going to end up, and maybe some of them are still like, I can see how that could be really complicated.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And there's so many factors at play. You know, it's not just temperature, it's not just them following their prey. So it's really tricky to estimate that. But yeah,
that makes sense. Someone in the chat had asked about the URL to the interactive site.
Yes.
I wondered if you could either put it in the chat now, or if I could always include it in the email I'll send out to everybody later.
Yes.
Whatever's easiest.
I have it here. I'll copy and paste it.
Okay, awesome. And maybe I'll still put it in the email to everybody.
Yeah, I found that just a few weeks ago, really, and it was really, I was blown away at how detailed it was. And I kind of had a funny full circle moment, because I, when I was playing around with it, just clicking on the different impacts, and after a few minutes, I ended up coming back to the same, like they were leading me in a circle, and I was just like, oh wow, that really illustrates how interconnected everything is, and you know, nothing is independent of each other, which makes it so difficult. But you know, when I was clicking on the people aspects of it, I ended up coming back to, you know, ocean fisheries. So it was really interesting, but it's a really great tool. So I urge people to use it and explore that, because it's pretty good.
For sure. Does anyone have any questions for Kirsti other than me? I'm just going to give people a minute. You should be able to unmute and share your video now, unless I mixed things up again, but I don't think I did. I'll just wait a second and I'll find my next question.
Sure.
No one else has any. Okay, I'll go ahead then. I guess I never realized that sea urchins lay eggs. Is that what you were saying? Is that kind of how that works? I know I looked at them a little bit, like when I did biology in school, but
yeah, no, sorry if I said they lay eggs.
Oh, that's okay. I think that was me misunderstanding what you said.
Yeah, no, that was the one of the sharks. Sea urchins.
Oh, the sharks.
They release their gametes and eggs into the open ocean, and they're fertilized just in the open ocean there. That's how they reproduce.
Okay.
But in the lab setting, what we would do is we would put potassium chloride in the water, and that would actually induce them, not potassium. Yeah, potassium. Chloride into the water, and that would induce them to spawn. So they would release all their sperm and eggs, and then we would collect it and actually manually fertilize them. And then those tubes that I had the photo of that's where we kept the eggs in, and it was just on a shaker to keep the seawater moving over and giving them oxygen. But yeah, that's how they would do it in the natural environment, is they would just release all of their gametes into the water. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think I got mixed up, so that's totally fine.
Yeah,
that's really neat.
Yeah, I'm sure people would have seen, I mean, if you ever go walking on the beach here, you see those like egg casings, the black, they're called mermaid purses.
Yeah,
I'm sure most people would have seen those on the beaches, but not all sharks are born in those, but some of them are. So, and same with skates, which is usually actually what you probably see around here, the skate egg casings. But it's pretty cool to find them on the beach. You know that they're around.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that video in the beginning was just in where in Nova Scotia was the that shark. I forget what kind it was now, but
it was a blue shark. So that was part of a course I took at Dow where we went out and was tagging blue sharks. So it was just off of, I don't even remember where we went out of, but we went on a fishing boat and we went out so far that you couldn't see any land anymore, like really out in the open ocean. But we were tagging, trying to catch and tag blue sharks, and specifically females we were trying to catch so that we could implant a tracker into them, because they're trying to see if, you know, where the females are going around here, is it a potential mating or breeding ground for blue sharks. Unfortunately, the day that we went, we didn't catch any females, just males. But as we were reeling that shark in, I just stuck my GoPro in the water. So that's where I got that footage of. And it was really cool. They're really, really pretty. I don't know if you remember the video, but they're really, really blue, hence their name, but they're really pretty. And yeah, that was an interesting experience. It was a really small fishing boat. I've never experienced this for 8 hours straight. I won't even talk about my seasickness, but it was definitely interesting. But I'm happy I got that cool video out of it, as I was trying not to vomit. Oh yes, Amanda. Yeah, we didn't go swimming with them. That probably would have helped the seasickness, is jumping in the water. But yeah, I just had my GoPro on a pole and I just stuck it in the water. I do have more videos of that one. We actually brought it on board and we're tagging it. But I didn't include it. I just thought that one video was good. But yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I took a couple of courses at Dow. I took like intro to oceanography. We were on a fishing boat, but we just stayed in the harbor. But I knew of other classes that were going out, and I was thinking like, oh man, that would be a real test to see if you were able to like withstand this, because I was scared that I would be seasick. But
yeah, usually I don't get seasick, but the fishing boat was so small, like really you could only have 8 people on it. And it took us like 2 hours to get out to where we were going, because blue sharks are open ocean inhabitants, so you had to go out pretty far to find them. But like the swell was huge and the boat was so small, you couldn't even like stand up straight at all. It was pretty brutal. But yeah, I probably wouldn't do that again on a small boat, but it was a good experience nonetheless. It's fun to look back on. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And how big are blue sharks?
They're not huge. Like they're definitely not the great whites or tiger sharks of the seas. They're pretty long and slender, but they're probably maybe they can still get pretty big, like 2 meters, 2 to 3 meters.
Okay. Are they like, I guess if you compare them to like a human size, they're smaller than?
Well, some of them, I guess it kind of depends.
Okay.
Yeah, like the females I think are bigger. So they would probably be a little bit, like I guess 6'5", so like around that. They're probably around the length of humans, but yeah, they're not massive or anything like the 15 feet great whites that you would see.
Gotcha. I see Carol has a comment about Seaspiracy. I don't know if you've seen it or have any comments about it. But. Yeah,
I've only seen it once, and it was like when it first came out, so that was in April. So I'm not sure I remember specific details, but I do remember it was definitely controversial. And yeah, that's tricky. I think it's an important topic that was brought up, because the things that were said, overfishing is a huge problem, and the way that fisheries are managed out in the open ocean really is not good. And so some of those things I completely did agree with, and it was a good way to bring up these discussions. but there was, I think, like some claims about, or I think they just kind of made it look bad when, you know, countries that actually really rely on fisheries as their main food source, and they're not the ones, you know, decimating the oceans. They're the ones that are, that's their livelihood, is fishing for their family at really small scale fisheries. I think they made that look bad, and that's really not the case. Is they're not the ones doing the damage. So some of the claims weren't scientifically based at all, but I think it was a really good way for people to bring up that topic and have a discussion about it. And it was kind of interesting that it did blow up. I mean, they had a platform to maybe make some better claims, but nonetheless, it brought the topic to light. And, you know, now there's opportunity to discuss it, which is good. But yeah, overall mixed feelings on it for sure, but it is important to talk about. And I think maybe it also discussed like labeling of seafood. I think, like I said, I really only watched it once, and that's interesting, and that's also a tricky topic, is do, you know, eco labeling of for sustainably sourced seafood, is it you know, is it actually what it's claimed to be? And that's a really, I could probably talk an hour about all the the difficulties surrounding that. But yeah, overall it was okay. I wish it was a little bit more scientifically based on their claims, but still, like I said, it brought a really important topic to light and opened the discussion for that. So yeah, thank you.
I don't know if you see Amanda's comment there. Suggestions for ways that Tantramar residents could help whales, sharks, and sea urchins. Are there actions we could take, good groups to support, etc.?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. We do live on the Bay of Fundy, so we have a really amazing ecosystem right here. I would say there is a lot of like the Ecology Action Center in Halifax, they do a lot, you know, they obviously do a lot with energy and climate change, but they also do a lot for our coastal ecosystems and sharks as well. So they do a lot for that. So following along them, I think, is good. At the, you know, the policy level for residents here, I'm not really sure. Obviously, just supporting, you know, if that's something that is important to you, you know, supporting policies that help with protection in marine protected areas when they come about is important to voice that. And but yeah, there is a lot going on in Atlantic Canada for sharks and, you know, the North Atlantic right whales. I'm sure everyone has heard about that, and the DFO has really done a lot of quick policy changes to help with the management of them with the fisheries interactions. So that's really great. But off the top of my head, I can't really think of like many specific organizations that we could follow, other than this last slide I had with all of those names. Like, those are mostly Canadian based conservation organizations. So maybe in the email that you put out, Lauren, I can just provide like a screenshot of all those organizations, and I can add some others. I can go and get more specifics. Like I said, that was not an exhaustive list. Those are just ones that came to my mind first. But yeah, I have to go and find some specifics and give that for everyone if they're interested.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be great. I can do that. I just had another question, if no one else does. I know you were talking about the spines of the sea urchins and the temperature of the water affecting the density of their shells.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, like, what the main purpose of the spines are. Is it to help them move, or protection, or just, I mean, it's an important part of their body, obviously. I just wondered.
Yeah. Yeah, it's mainly for protection. They have little tube feet, like kind of like starfish have on their bottom, so that's how they move around. But their spines are, yes, their means of protection. Although they do come off pretty easily. I stabbed myself a few times when I was cleaning the tanks, and the spines just fell off of the sea urchin. I mean, they are sharp, it would stick to you, but I think when you're a fish trying to eat them, that would deter you enough as having a spine in your face or in your mouth. But yeah, they are for protection, not for moving around. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And did those crown of thorn sea stars have spines? Or
mm-hmm.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they have really big spines, and they're actually poisonous, toxic. I don't know which one's the right term. I should know that. But yeah, so we had to use gloves when we were handling them, because if one actually went into your hand, it would cause a reaction, and that is their defense mechanism, is the toxin. So when a predator tries eating them, that's the deterrent. But yeah, it could, if you had a lot of it, it could kill you. So they are scary, and they're really big. Like they're this big, and they have so many arms and so many spines, and yeah, that is their very good defense mechanism are those spines. Yeah.
And hopefully they're only in Australia, right?
Yes, I believe.
Area.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if they're an invasive over here, but I don't think they are. So thankfully, because we have the lionfish over here that are decimating the coral reefs in the Caribbean. But yeah, no, they're just over on that side of the world, thankfully. And yeah, there actually isn't a lot known about them. They're doing a lot of work to see, what causes their outbreaks, because when they have outbreaks, they're in like the millions of numbers, and they just go through coral reefs and eat them. So it's something that's actually a major problem there, but they think it's because of increased nutrients in the water. There's a lot of agriculture right on the coast where that meets the Great Barrier Reef, and so all of the nutrients are going into the water, which is good for them to reproduce and kind of take over. But yeah, they're interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for all this information. We really appreciate it. Yeah, so thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Kirsti. Any last words?
Thank you, everyone, for listening to me talk about the oceans. Have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you, Lauren, for hosting.
No problem. Okay, guys, take care.
Thanks. See you.
Bye.